For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A young species from a volatile world. Physically fragile. Politically divided. In the archives of the Galactic Council, Earth was categorized with polite indifference, developing civilization, minimal strategic relevance. Humanity existed on the margins of galactic awareness, not because it was hidden, but because it was dismissed. Ignored by the galaxy. Dismissed by those in power. The Council believed danger was obvious. Threats announced themselves with expansion fleets, ideological crusades, or aggressive demands for territory. Humanity did none of that. Their progress was slow, uneven, frequently interrupted by internal crises that seemed to confirm every pessimistic projection. Wars among themselves. Economic collapses. Governments rising and falling in rapid succession. To the Council, humanity looked unstable, and therefore harmless. No one realized how dangerous that assumption was. Because humanity never evolved under comfort. They evolved under failure. Their entire history was shaped by systems breaking at the worst possible moment. Supply chains collapsing. Institutions failing. Disasters rewriting rules overnight. Survival was never guaranteed. It had to be rebuilt again and again from whatever remained. Humans learned early that stability was temporary. That authority could vanish overnight. That survival belonged to those who prepared for collapse instead of denying it. So when humanity finally reached beyond its home system and brushed against the edges of galactic civilization, they did not arrive with demands or declarations. They listened, observed, studied how power actually worked. They noticed something unsettling. The Council did not rule through constant force. It ruled through access. Who could trade? Who could travel? Who could speak without consequence? Control was maintained not by war, but by isolation. Humanity took note. When diplomatic contact finally occurred, it was intentionally mundane. Requests were filed correctly. Protocols followed perfectly. No urgency. No ambition. No challenge. The Council barely noticed. Weak species often behaved well. And then, quietly, humanity disappeared. Trade diminished. Diplomatic traffic slowed. Eventually, human space faded from relevance entirely. To the Council, it was just another minor civilization that had failed to thrive. Years passed. Then decades. And then, without warning, the fleet appeared. Not near contested borders. Not in aggressive formation. It appeared where no one was watching. Long-range sensors detected mass where none should exist. Navigation systems recalibrated themselves without instruction. Space behaved incorrectly. Reports flooded in, each one dismissed until the data became impossible to ignore. Humanity had returned. And they were not asking for recognition. They were already finished. The mistake was never underestimating humanity's technology. It was underestimating humanity's patience. Because humans did not rush to prove themselves. They did not seek validation from institutions they had already learned not to trust. They prepared quietly, thoroughly, and without the need to be seen. And when the fleet finally emerged, silent, massive, impossibly precise, the galaxy understood the truth far too late. Humanity had never been weak. They had simply been waiting. Waiting for the moment when strength mattered more than authority. Waiting for the moment when preparation outweighed tradition. Waiting for the moment when the galaxy would learn the difference between power that talks and power that arrives. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not with fleets or ultimatums. Those were reserved for threats worth acknowledging. Humanity was handled with something far more effective. Procedure. Policy. Quiet exclusion wrapped in legality. First came the trade restrictions. Human shipping lanes were flagged for extended review. Docking permissions stalled indefinitely. Insurance networks quietly reclassified human vessels as high risk, making commerce impossible without ever declaring it illegal. Trade was cut. Critical imports, medical compounds, advanced alloys, precision components, were suddenly unavailable. Supply chains strained. Peripheral colonies felt it first, then the core worlds. Prices rose. Shortages followed. Council economists watched calmly. They had seen this outcome countless times. Scarcity led to unrest. Unrest led to division. Division led to submission. Then came the legal measures. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost access to council chambers. Observer status was suspended, pending reassessment. Information networks that once returned open data now responded with sanitized fragments, or silence. Travel permits expired and were not renewed. Diplomatic channels collapsed into automated acknowledgments. Humanity was no longer a participant. They were a variable. Unmanaged. Unpredictable. Inconvenient. Isolation followed naturally. No warships blockaded Earth. No weapons darkened human skies. The Council simply removed humanity from the systems that sustained interstellar civilization. No arbitration. No emergency assistance. No voice. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the confidence of an authority that believed exclusion was a death sentence. The Council expected collapse. They expected humanity's long history of internal division to resurface under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected governments to fracture and blame one another as shortages deepened. Projections were filed. Months to instability. 1 year to internal unrest. 2 years to compliance. But the collapse never came. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human systems stabilized. Emergency protocols activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted without public debate. Rationing was implemented quietly, efficiently, and calmly. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Human communication traffic surged, but not with outrage. With coordination. Rival factions that had undermined one another for generations began sharing data without treaties or announcements. Old disputes were shelved as irrelevant. The Council flagged the anomaly. Then dismissed it. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had rehearsed this scenario its entire history. Economic crashes. Political collapses. Environmental disasters. Systems failing when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't new. It was familiar. Humanity did not demand reinstatement. Did not appeal to council morality. Did not threaten retaliation. They did something far more unsettling. They stopped asking. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced to the galaxy. Old technologies were resurrected, redesigned, and scaled beyond what council standards had ever permitted. Every regulation was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole used without technically breaking a single rule. Sanctions meant to isolate human space began rippling outward, damaging council-aligned economies that had quietly depended on human adaptability. The Council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter. More ordered. More deliberate. Reports began noting a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient. Less responsive to pressure. Less dependent on approval. Less affected by authority that only functioned when it was believed in. Containment had always worked because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, a realization began to take shape, one no one wanted to voice aloud. You cannot control a civilization that has learned how to survive without you. And once that lesson is learned, authority stops being power and becomes background noise. Isolation was supposed to finish the process. That was the Council's certainty. History supported it. When a civilization was cut off from trade, legitimacy, and external support, it fractured. Old rivalries resurfaced. Cooperation collapsed into competition. Containment always worked. Eventually, humanity should have broken. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the change was subtle. Political broadcasts grew shorter. Ideological arguments lost their urgency. Leaders who had built power on division found fewer audiences willing to listen. When the last sanctioned trade routes went silent, humanity stopped arguing about who was right and started asking a far more important question. Who would still be alive tomorrow? Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders still existed on maps, but they stopped dictating behavior. Rival governments paused conflicts that had lasted generations without treaties or victory speeches. There were no grand declarations of unity, no celebrations of reconciliation. Humanity didn't romanticize cooperation. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external power to stabilize failure. No council fleet arriving to restore order if things went wrong. Humanity was alone. And once that reality settled in, priorities aligned with ruthless clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of expanding bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Redundant authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for dominance, but streamlined for speed. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, every major colony agreed on a single operational framework. Not built on ideology. Not culture. Not ambition. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a single ruler. It was a system, lean, adaptive, intolerant of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige vanished overnight. Ego became a liability. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research divisions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or national pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in size, but in purpose. Fleets once designed to deter rivals were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Every person became part of the system, not as a soldier, but as a stabilizing element. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. And then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Human communication traffic actually decreased, even as coordination reached levels no external observer had ever recorded. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them efficient. Focused. Unsettlingly calm. Council analysts, still watching from afar, misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted isolation. That exclusion had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity something else entirely. Clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was at stake. Isolation did what no treaty ever had. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And that was the moment the Council truly lost its advantage, though it wouldn't realize it for some time yet. Because a divided species can be managed. A fractured civilization can be pressured. But a species unified by survival, one that no longer believes authority guarantees safety, cannot be controlled. Humanity had not united to challenge the galaxy. They had united to endure it. And once they did, everything changed. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements. No demonstrations meant to reclaim attention. No attempts to prove worth to a galaxy that had already made up its mind. Humanity had learned that visibility invited pressure, and pressure invited control. So they vanished from notice. Isolation stripped away distraction. Research institutions that once competed for prestige were merged into unified networks. Projects delayed for political convenience were accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for approval and started designing for failure, assuming systems would break, supply lines would vanish, and no one would come to help. New engines came first. Not engines built for speed records or territorial expansion, but for endurance. Drives capable of operating for years without resupply. Propulsion systems tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvised repair. Human ships sacrificed raw velocity for reliability, redundancy, and range. They could go farther without support. They could stay longer without resupply. They no longer needed permission to move. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored singular, overwhelming energy barriers, immense, elegant, and catastrophic when they failed. Humanity rejected that philosophy entirely. They layered everything. Adaptive fields that reshaped under stress. Redundant systems that degraded gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Structural composites that absorbed force rather than resisting it outright. Human shields were not invincible. They were relentless. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons development followed, but quietly. Humanity did not pursue extinction-level firepower or dramatic superweapons. They focused on systems that functioned after months of isolation. Weapons that could be repaired in deep space by exhausted crews with limited tools. Human weapons were not elegant. They were dependable. And then there were the fleets. They were not assembled in massive, centralized shipyards that could be observed, catalogued, and threatened. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular and interchangeable. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Naval doctrine changed accordingly. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, guided by shared principles rather than constant instruction. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood combat repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the baseline. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for revenge. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to negotiation. Victory was redefined. Not defeat the enemy. Ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That isolation had capped their growth. That containment had worked. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond assumption and observation. And when the fleet finally emerged, silent, massive, and impossibly precise, the galaxy would realize the truth it had missed for far too long. Humanity had not been idle. They had been preparing to survive a universe that never planned to protect them. And now, they were ready. The first warning was easy to dismiss. A frontier system went dark. No distress call, no debris, no signs of battle. Council analysts logged it as a relay malfunction and reassigned the sensors. Border regions were unstable. Data gaps were routine. Then another system vanished. Then another. By the time unsanctioned jump routes flooded with refugees, the pattern was impossible to ignore. They arrived with corrupted recordings, fragmented telemetry, and the same word spoken with quiet certainty. The Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They arrived. The Dominion was not an alliance or an ideology. It was an empire engineered for conquest, refined over centuries of expansion. Their fleets moved with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses before panic could organize into resistance. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms were neutralized in minutes. Planetary shields collapsed under sustained, methodical pressure. Defense fleets were dismantled not in heroic last stands, but in clean, efficient sequences. Infrastructure was seized intact wherever possible. The Dominion did not seek chaos. They sought control. Species were enslaved, not exterminated, catalogued. Populations were sorted by utility. Administrators were retained. Labor forces reassigned. Biological resources indexed. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed quietly, efficiently, and permanently. Fear spread faster than the invasion itself. Council-aligned task forces were deployed, veteran fleets armed with technologies that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They engaged the Dominion and vanished. Not in spectacular explosions, but in silence. Formations collapsed. Signals cut out mid-transmission. And still, the Council argued. Emergency sessions were convened and dissolved into procedural paralysis. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Voting blocs stalled action. Committees debated jurisdiction and response thresholds, while live feeds showed cities burning and evacuation corridors collapsing. Some delegates called for negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few proposed sacrifice, ceding outer systems to buy time. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts pushed inward, the Council's authority began to fracture. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear overrode obligation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became reality. The Galactic Council, the oldest authority the galaxy had ever known, was losing. That was when the chamber went silent. Someone said the name no one wanted to hear. Humanity. The objections came instantly. Humanity was weak, isolated, irrelevant. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their political status non-existent. Some delegates insisted humanity had likely collapsed under isolation long ago, another failed civilization erased by its own limitations. But others remembered. Human space had gone quiet years before the Dominion appeared. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate transmissions begging for reintegration. Just silence, orderly, deliberate silence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message was careful, polite, urgent without sounding desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need for unity against an existential threat. It did not mention sanctions. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity reviewed the data. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrine. Logistics throughput. Behavioral patterns. They compared it against internal simulations, some of which matched the unfolding invasion with disturbing accuracy. The Council expected panic. They got analysis. When humanity finally replied, the response was calm, measured, almost unsettling in its restraint. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated, plainly, that humanity possessed the capability to engage. There was no promise of rescue, only consideration. The Council protested, invoked shared destiny, demanded urgency, reminded humanity of what was at stake. Humanity did not hurry. Because another system fell, this one close enough to the Council core that evacuation alarms echoed through the chamber itself. Delegates who had argued procedure moments earlier now begged for intervention. And in that moment, the truth crystallized. The Council had isolated the one civilization that had prepared for abandonment. They had dismissed the species that planned for systemic failure. They had underestimated the people who built for survival instead of dominance. The Dominion did not fear authority. It did not respect tradition. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had planned for an enemy like that was the one the Council had always believed was weak. Stripped of leverage and illusion, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable. They turned to humanity, not as a subordinate, not as a member, but as the last civilization that might still be capable of acting, while the rest of the galaxy was still arguing over what should be done. And in that choice, the Council finally understood the cost of its mistake. Because the fleet humanity had built was never meant to impress. It was meant to be used. When everyone else had already run out of time, the Council expected forgiveness. They prepared for it the way they always had, carefully worded statements, regret diluted into miscalculation, responsibility softened into circumstance. In every crisis before this one, fear had produced reconciliation. Authority bent just enough to survive. They believed humanity would do the same. Humanity did not. The reply arrived without ceremony. No accusations. No emotional language. Just confirmation of receipt, verification of the intelligence provided, and a precise list of errors in the Council's projections. The Council answered immediately. Then they waited. When humanity's decision finally came, it was calm, so calm it unsettled the chamber more than anger ever could. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated that humanity had prepared for a scenario of this nature. Then came the sentence that emptied the room of sound. We will decide when to act. No conditions followed. No appeal for trust. No demand for apology. Just resolve. The Council erupted. Delegates shouted about moral obligation and collective extinction. Some accused humanity of cruelty. Others of arrogance. A few tried to reassert authority, invoking charters, jurisdiction, and sanctions as if repeating them might restore their power. Humanity did not respond. They didn't need to, because authority does not survive the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories began reporting anomalies near the edges of human-controlled space. Not weapons fire. Not fleet mobilizations. Something subtler. Gravitational sensors detected rhythmic distortions, too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent just slightly out of alignment, as if the structure of space were being adjusted rather than disturbed. Council engineers blamed calibration errors. They were wrong. Independent traders began transmitting reports, vast silhouettes appearing and vanishing beyond detection thresholds. Not fleets forming up, but structures repositioning with deliberate intent. Patterns emerging across regions too large to dismiss as coincidence. Humanity was not rushing to war. They were aligning. A final transmission arrived, short, unencrypted, unmistakably human. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time since its founding, the Galactic Council faced a truth it could not debate away. Humanity did not need its permission, did not fear its displeasure, did not confuse urgency with obligation. As the chamber dissolved into chaos, something unexpected happened on the invasion front. The Dominion slowed. Not halted. Not repelled. Just slowed, enough for their commanders to notice gaps in predictive models that had never failed before. Enough to sense resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast finished positioning itself. Space itself began to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood the difference between desperation and decision. Forgiveness is asked for by the weak. Permission is requested by the dependent. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because the Council had asked, but because humanity had decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never detected the beginning of the war. There was no surge in subspace. No warning spike. No distortion wave racing ahead of an advancing armada. One moment, Dominion fleets advanced through conquered systems with mechanical certainty, formations refined by centuries of unopposed conquest. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. There was no rupture, no violent transition, no energy bloom to announce them. They simply resolved into existence, vast shapes unfolding from the dark as if the universe itself had accepted their presence. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations were wrong by every known doctrine. Not clustered for assault. Not spread for intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing escape vectors before the Dominion even understood those vectors were gone. This wasn't a battle line. It was a closure. Dominion sensors lagged behind reality, struggling to reconcile mass where moments ago there had been nothing. Targeting solutions flickered, recalculated, failed. Command algorithms spiraled, unable to explain how an opposing force of that scale could appear without triggering a single early warning threshold. Before a firing order could be issued, every channel lit up. Primary command frequencies. Encrypted tactical relays. Emergency fallback bands. Even internal coordination networks believed to be unreachable. One message crossed every protocol at once. Stand down. It wasn't amplified. It wasn't threatening. It carried no emotion, only certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening volley never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy. They absorbed it. Layered fields reshaped in real time, bending and redistributing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than resist it. Power that should have overwhelmed any known shield simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never got the chance to fire again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by fractions of a second, imperceptible in isolation, catastrophic in aggregate. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled down to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Across Dominion command structures, panic spread. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers screamed into command channels that no longer responded, unable to understand why their most trusted redundancies had betrayed them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting it. They reached into assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never thought to protect them. Dependencies that functioned flawlessly against weaker civilizations and catastrophically against an opponent that had built everything around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no insignia. No declaration of authority. Just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands. No negotiations. The statement was final. As the signal propagated through Dominion command networks, fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, unsure whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, and devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to stop the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And across the galaxy, one truth settled with terrifying clarity. The Council had believed humanity was weak. The fleet changed everything. Because power was not what humanity had brought with them. It was restraint. And the galaxy would never forget the difference. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency assemblies were convened within hours of the Dominion's collapse. Ancient charters were retrieved and read aloud as if tradition itself could restore authority. Oversight committees were proposed, amended, and proposed again. Jurisdiction was asserted in firmer tones, louder voices. The galaxy listened. Then it moved on. It was too late. Because control does not return once it is revealed to be optional. Worlds rebuilt without waiting for council approval. Defense agreements formed laterally, between neighbors who had watched procedure fail while cities burned. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the sanctioned corridors the council once regulated. The council still existed, but it no longer decided what happened next. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They declined every offer of permanent leadership, refused expanded authority, ignored proposals to restructure galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, imposed no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back, not into isolation, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark, positioning themselves in ways no political model could predict. They did not hover over capitals or patrol borders. They lingered near fracture points, regions where history showed authority failed first and consequences spread fastest. Always distant, always present, never demanding obedience. Slowly, the galaxy understood what humanity had become. Not conquerors, not rulers, a contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When old empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats. They promised no protection. Their presence alone changed behavior. Former Dominion officers, those few left alive and free, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have annihilated them and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than fear ever could. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by tradition fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through age or declared through titles. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the bright halls where authority once lived, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse comes out of the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command, not to conquer, but to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.